Today, I'm going to try to draw this mystical, mysterious stone wall in Tallinn, Estonia, and it was just by happenstance that I stumbled upon it. It's right around the corner from one of my favorite coffee shops. You could probably see it off to the left through this window if I got any closer. And honestly, that's how a lot of these videos go. I have a small handful of things I might have in mind to draw at any given time, but the overwhelming majority of my references simply reveal themselves to me, which sounds a lot more romantic than it is because actually I've grown pretty accustomed to it happening, so I'm always kind of waiting for something nice to appear, which ends up taking a lot more time than it probably should. But yeah, this one was completely unplanned and unexpected, but I thought it looked interesting, so I gave it a shot. With that, I don't know about you, but I'm surprised I chose to draw this. My textural abilities, as I'll call them, are lacking, to say the least, and yet that's pretty much all I have to go on here. There's some obvious shape going on with the wall itself, like the windows and that upper part that ascends out of the frame, but aside from that, this is all just foliage and building texture, things I've really struggled with up to now. However, maybe it was the caffeine, maybe it was the newish pen that I'm using, which I'll get back to in a second, or maybe I'm just making another little step of progress. Whatever it is, I feel so good about this drawing. Not to say it's good, that's never what I mean, but it just exhibits what appears to be me progressing, which is a remarkable feeling and the reason I'm doing this. I usually say something like, I wouldn't have been able to XYZ a few weeks ago, but today I'll say that I wouldn't have approached something like this even a few days ago. There's nothing here that would have given me a modicum of hope, but for some inexplicable reason, I was feeling confident, which is strange considering yesterday's debacle. But whatever, I'll take it. Right, so the pen. You'll notice it's the same brand and the same type of pen. It's a fine liner, just like the one I've been using for a bit now. But as my usual one is a 003, this one is a 03. I'd love to say that I just wanted to try something new, broaden my horizons a little, but no, it was just an accident. I wanted to pick a few more of the 003s up, just in case I went somewhere from which they would be more difficult to source, I guess. But yeah, I grabbed a few of these instead. I just saw that number 3 and that was that. If you don't know the difference, the number denotes the size of the nib, like the tip of the pen, meaning the width of the line, meaning a 003 is just a lot finer than this 03. So what do I think? I'm loving it. The thicker lines make a scene like this one much more manageable because I can fill in the shadows with, let's say, one mark rather than what I'm used to with the finer tip, where I sometimes need to reapply and, go back over those marks to achieve a similar result. Thankfully, I noticed this happy mistake before I started this drawing, or else it would have been jarring, to say the least. As I was filming the reference video on the left, I grabbed my pocket sketchbook to see just how difficult this was about to be, and I drew one short line to make a little frame for me to sketch in, and I immediately knew something was different. It was pretty obvious. I think the planets must be aligned or something because I cannot think of a better reference for this to have coincided with. All of these dark areas underneath and around these stones would have been possible with the other pen, obviously, but I found that this thicker one helped me move around the drawing a lot quicker, so I didn't get bogged down in one small area or demoralized over my inefficiency. I didn't need to squiggle in these dark areas as much as I'm sure I would have had to do with the finer one, and I never felt pressed for time, which most likely would have caused me to rush through the latter half of the drawing. So yeah, overall, I'm really pleased with the flow of this one, undoubtedly thanks to these thicker lines. I didn't feel like every small detail needed to be included, which I do sometimes feel with the finer pen, so I could really relax into the process here, moving quickly from one thing to the next. As opposed to practically every other iteration of texture I've done thus far, today I'm making it a point to draw as much of it as possible. It's not a one-to-one reproduction, of course, but I'm following certain, let's say, compositional beats. So, for example, while each and every stone to the right of the window, the ones you can see kind of protruding toward the camera, aren't going to match, I am going to try to include that general protrusion, and I'm going to use certain shapes that I see in the reference to inform how I go about drawing it. So the exact order or pattern won't transfer over directly to my drawing, but small things like specific shapes and angles might. I'm doing this process relatively quickly, so it's nice to be able to look up and get some ideas and then look back down to implement them somewhere near the areas that I saw them. Usually, and you would know this if you've seen any of my other videos, my approach to texture is extremely minimal. The last thing I ever want to do is include too much of it so that I ruin what I've made. So I often opt for too little over too much. So the way I typically go about drawing something like this would be to imply a few of these shapes and just leave it at that. You can see on the right side of frame that some of those stones are comparatively pretty flush and smooth, and that area would be easy to suggest with just a few lines, which is exactly how I treat them here, versus say these protruding ones that exhibit a lot more depth and therefore contrast, so I give them a lot more attention. Had I drawn this with the finer pen, I probably would have stuck to my usual method throughout the entire drawing, and I have a feeling I would have really struggled with those more textural areas. Without a method to lean on, I probably would have approached them really precisely, which almost certainly wouldn't have worked, resulting in, if I'm honest, what I would have expected to happen with this drawing anyway. Thankfully, again, I had this, sort of altered medium with the thicker pen, so I felt comfortable to kind of tread new ground. Anyway, final note on the pen. After this experience, I've decided to keep them both with me. The switch from the ballpoint pen to the fine liner was pretty massive. It just changed everything for me. So I actually stopped carrying the ballpoint pen altogether because I didn't think I'd ever randomly decide to use it. But while this is also quite a change, I wouldn't want to lock myself into only one or the other. There are plenty of cases where this thicker pen just wouldn't work for my needs, and the same goes for the thinner one. So going forward, I'll take them both and decide which one to use on a case-by-case basis. My hope is that by having both with me at all times, my options for references will broaden, and maybe at some point I'll even be able to implement them both into a single drawing, depending on my needs. And yeah, all right, I will stop talking about the pens. Okay, so I realized the other day that while I do talk a lot about the process and like where my head's at and all that, I don't make much of an effort to explain the mechanics of what you're seeing on screen. So maybe today would be a good time to start doing that. You already know why I'm doing what I'm doing, but what I'm doing is probably just as important. So to get started, I am thinking in these like vertical and horizontal pen strokes for the stones and extra strokes on top of those for the shadows. I'm looking at the dark areas, so not the stones themselves, and I'm just trying to fill all of that in, although I'm getting back to the why. Most of the boulder marks are going to belong below more often than above, thanks to the direction of light coming, downward from the sun. So when I carve out these rectangular shapes, I tend to go back and add a little extra below and between to imply that depth. Also, you can see that for the tree on the left, I haven't added any texture to it, and I don't plan on it. I want that area to be completely just negative space, just a subtle suggestion. So the only part of the tree that I'm drawing, which technically doesn't even exist really, is its silhouette. and I've drawn it in by using light, squiggly lines. Every now and then, as I work my way through the general shape, I'm including little bits of variety to imply a different bunch of foliage. If it was all uniform and like round, it would look a lot more childish, which I'd like to avoid at all costs because I'm already struggling enough with that. So I'm trying to inject just enough randomness to make things realistic. As far as what my hand is physically doing, I'm just keeping it as loose as possible, avoiding shapes that are too precise and specifically leaf shaped, since that wouldn't really align with the whole silhouette. And because I want to make this with negative space, I'm omitting things like branches and depth, which is candidly the hardest part. Ignoring those big shapes right in front of me is strange. Foreground wise, I'm taking a similar tack and loosely suggesting all that foliage. To differentiate it from the rest of the scene and to make sure that this pathway doesn't look like some weird tail hanging down from the bottom of the wall, I'm adding some foliage with these quick, slightly arched lines with some very loose, squiggly bits at the top. If everything I'm saying sounds super elegant and professional, you should get your ears checked because boy, do I not know what I'm talking about. The depths of my knowledge in terms of technique and especially vocabulary are shallow. Don't worry, I'm well aware. And before we finish this up, please notice the rain. And please also thank my lovely wife for holding over me the umbrella that she thoughtfully packed today, protecting the sketchbook from getting wet and protecting me from a tantrum. It actually wasn't too bad while I was drawing, but as soon as I stopped, it really started pouring. Anyway, amazing. Here we are. I think this marks another small step in the right direction. The texture obviously has a long way to go, but I'm feeling a lot more confident and I'm excited to try out some more similar references. So what do you think? How would you rate this on a scale of 1 to 10? What other horrible textures should I attempt? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you for taking the time to listen to me rave about my happy pen accident, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.